Under the heavy silence of deep time, the earth remembers. From the frozen bones of extinct beasts to the ruins that scar the continents, fragments of another world wait for us to listen. Across every ancient culture, Sumerian, Greek, Norse, Mayan, Hopi, Maori, there echoes the same haunting refrain. Once, long ago, giants walked among us. They were not spirits nor gods, but beings of flesh and power, who lived, built, and died before the first empires of man. When night fell on their age, memory turned them into myth. Wind moves over a mountain plain. The voice of a storyteller begins, low and steady, as though continuing a tale already centuries old. They were called by many names. The Nephilim of Genesis, born of the sons of God and the daughters of men. The Titans of Greece, who challenged heaven and fell. The Yutnar of the north, vast as glaciers. The Quinametsin of Mexico, builders before the flood. To the old tribes of the Mississippi, they were the mound builders, whose graves rose higher than the trees. In each version, the giants were punished for their pride, destroyed by flood or fire, driven into the mountains to die alone. But in each, something remained, the sense that they had once been real. Myths do not appear without roots. They cling to the soil of memory. Some scholars believe these stories preserve the faint recollection of another kind of human. Imagine the late Pleistocene world, harsh and wild, where our ancestors roamed among creatures now long vanished. They would have met other beings, heavier, broader, their strength adapted to cold and hunger. To small tribes of Homo sapiens, those strangers must have seemed godlike. The encounter burned itself into legend. When words were still new, it became the story of giants. In forgotten archives and dusty newspapers, fragments of the hunt for those giants remain. Farmers in Ohio unearthed enormous bones in the 1800s. Miners in Nevada told of skulls twice the size of a man's. Explorers in Patagonia swore they met people of towering height. Each discovery sparked wonder, then silence. Museums locked the evidence away or called it fraud. Yet the pattern of stories, repeating across oceans and ages, hints at a deeper truth. Humanity remembers what it fears and what it envies. Science, ever cautious, draws different lines. It shows us bones of real giants, the colossal ape Gigantopithecus of ancient Asia, Homo heidelbergensis, strong and tall enough to rival modern athletes, the Neanderthals, thick-boned and powerful, whose strength outmatched ours. None reached the mythical heights of 10 or 12 feet, but in the eyes of early humans, even a head taller could look divine. Evolution itself can create giants, adaptation to cold climates, abundance of food, or random chance. The boundary between myth and memory may be no more than a few inches of bone. Still, something within us resists reduction. When we look at the colossal stones of Baalbek, the cyclopean walls of Peru, or the half-buried statues of Easter Island, reason whispers of engineering and leverage, but the heart remembers giants. Their shadows move through scripture, art, and dream. They embody what humans both desire and dread: strength without mercy, knowledge without humility, the echo of something greater than ourselves. Perhaps the giants never died. Perhaps they survive in our DNA, fragments of forgotten kin whose blood still flows in our veins. Studies of ancient genomes reveal mixtures once thought impossible, Homo sapiens carrying Neanderthal and Denisovan traces, evidence of unions long buried. If we share the genes of those other humans, then the giants have not vanished. They have become us, and we have become their memory. The sky darkens above a range of stone peaks. Lightning reveals the faint outline of a colossal figure carved into rock, its features worn away by time. The narrator's voice softens, almost a whisper. Every legend begins somewhere. Sometimes truth hides in the oldest lies. Beneath our feet, beneath the centuries of denial and forgetting, the bones of giants may still lie waiting for the light. Beneath layers of soil and silence, the bones of giants may still lie waiting for the light. For centuries, explorers, priests, and scientists have walked the same path, chasing the ghosts of colossal beings whose presence lingers in every continent's oldest tales. Across oceans and deserts, from Babylon to the Andes, humanity's collective memory hums with the same strange melody. We were not alone. The story repeats in patterns too perfect to ignore. The Bible speaks of the sons of God who took the daughters of men and begot giants. The Greeks told of the Titans who built mountains from stone and defied the heavens. The Norse warned of frost-born giants older than the gods themselves. In the Pacific, islanders speak of ancestors who stood twice the height of any man. In South America, conquistadors swore they met tribes of immense stature roaming Patagonia. And in the red dust of the American Southwest, the Navajo tell of the Starneck, giants who once hunted men before being destroyed by thunder and fire. It is easy to dismiss such stories as coincidence, as humanity's shared fascination with strength and fear. Yet how could cultures divided by oceans and millennia converge upon the same image? A race of beings both powerful and doomed. Perhaps myths spread like seeds, carried along trade routes and conquests. Or perhaps they grow from the same soil of memory, sprouting where the ground is oldest and blood has been spilled. When we trace the stories backward, they begin to align with archaeology's shadow. Fragments of giant tools unearthed in Java, footprints embedded in volcanic stone in South Africa, enormous sarcophagi in Egypt and Sardinia. Each one invites the same forbidden question. Who built these, and for whom? In the 19th century, America's appetite for mystery became a frenzy. Newspapers printed breathless accounts of giant skeletons found in mounds across the Midwest. Some were described as 8 or 10 feet tall, buried with copper ornaments or massive stone weapons. Locals gathered to watch as bones were lifted from the earth. Then the evidence vanished, sold, stored, or dismissed. The Smithsonian institution was accused of hiding the truth. Scientists scoffed at the idea of an ancient race of giants, yet the reports continued. From Nevada's Lovelock Cave, from the Aleutian Islands, from the Tennessee valleys. Each discovery was treated as an embarrassment, a story best forgotten. But in the silence that followed, belief only grew stronger. Humanity, it seems, is drawn to giants because they represent the edge of what is possible. They are the embodiment of the question we can never stop asking. Could we have been more than what we are? In every legend, giants are both creators and destroyers, born to shape the world and fated to be erased by it. Floods, fires, divine wrath, each myth ends the same way. The giants fall, and humanity inherits their ruins. The Bible's flood story mirrors Sumerian epics written thousands of years earlier. The Maya and the Greeks speak of cycles of destruction that cleanse the earth. Even the geologic record, with its evidence of sudden cataclysms at the end of the last ice age, seems to hum the same refrain. A world remade in water and ash. What if these floods were not only geological, but cultural? Civilizations drown in time as surely as cities drown in rivers. Memory becomes legend. Legend becomes myth. The Nephilim, the Titans, the Anakim, different names for the same fading shape. And as history rewrote itself, the giants became moral warnings instead of ancestors. Pride before the fall. Power without wisdom. Their bones, if they ever existed, were lost, but their meaning survived, reshaped to fit each era's fears. When we step back and look at the pattern, a deeper truth emerges. The legend of giants is not just about beings of enormous size. It is about scale itself. The human need to measure our world against something greater. To the ancient mind, a mountain was a god's footprint, a megalithic wall the work of beings beyond human strength. As civilization rose, that awe turned inward. We began to see giants not in the earth but in ourselves, in the artists, conquerors, and dreamers who tower above the ordinary. Still, the old stories persist. Somewhere between myth and archaeology, between scripture and science, the trail continues. It winds through forgotten valleys, sealed tombs, and brittle texts written by trembling hands. And as we follow it deeper, a strange realization dawns. The more we try to bury the giants, the more we uncover ourselves. Because to understand why we invented them or remembered them, we must face the oldest question of all. What does it mean to be human in a world once ruled by something greater? The wind stirs the dust over a dry riverbed, where ancient footprints fade into stone. The narrator's voice drops to a whisper. The journey is only beginning. Ahead lies the evidence that refuses to die, the bones beneath our feet, and the story they still want to tell. For centuries, the legends of giants remained confined to scripture, myth, and rumor. But every legend casts a shadow, and sometimes that shadow leaves bones behind. The first reports began to surface during the Age of Exploration, when European sailors stepped onto the distant shores of South America and Africa. They wrote of tribes of men twice their height, of footprints too large for any ordinary being. Magellan's crew swore they met Patagones, towering people who laughed at their fear. In the centuries that followed, explorers, colonists, and missionaries carried home more stories, each claiming to have found proof that the giants of old had walked the earth. By the dawn of the 19th century, those stories collided with science. In America's heartland, farmers and archaeologists unearthed strange skeletons in the great earthen mounds that dotted the Mississippi Valley. Some of the bones were unusually large, their skulls broad and heavy, the femurs massive. Local newspapers called them the remains of a race of giants that preceded the Indians. Crowds gathered to witness the exhumations. Some specimens were displayed in traveling fairs, others scientists collected for study. Then, silence. The bones disappeared into drawers, museums, and basements, leaving behind only clippings and memories. In 1891, in Crittenden, Arizona, miners digging through a collapsed shaft claimed to find a fossilized human leg bone nearly 4 feet long. In France, near the Rhone, paleontologists uncovered bones of a man measuring over 11 feet, if reconstructed, a claim quickly buried beneath ridicule. In the Philippines, enormous molars were unearthed in the 1930s, attributed to a creature later named Gigantopithecus, an ape towering 3 meters high that roamed Asia hundreds of thousands of years ago. Science accepted the ape, but not the idea that humans themselves had once grown so vast. Still, the ground keeps offering its secrets. In Africa, ancient footprints pressed into volcanic ash tell of beings who stood a head taller than modern man. In Java, massive stone tools were found, so heavy that only a body far stronger than ours could have wielded them. And in the caves of northern China, fragments of skulls and jaws suggested creatures of enormous strength. Yet the more evidence appeared, the tighter skepticism became. Mainstream anthropology reclassified the bones, labeling them errors, mismeasurements, or fossils of extinct animals mistaken for men. The very possibility of giant humans was pushed to the margins of science, buried beneath ridicule and dust. But in truth, bones do not lie. What they tell may be uncomfortable, but it endures. Homo heidelbergensis, our ancient ancestor who lived between 700,000 and 200,000 years ago, stood tall and powerful, broad-shouldered, with a brain nearly as large as our own. He hunted with wooden spears, tamed fire, and faced creatures that could tear a man apart. Some populations may have reached extraordinary size, shaped by cold climates and relentless survival. In a different age, viewed through myth, they would have been called giants. We have found their echoes in Neanderthals too, short yet massive, their bones dense as iron, their grip twice the strength of ours. The Denisovans, known only from a handful of bones and teeth found in the Siberian wilderness, reveal through DNA that they interbred with us, leaving traces still living in the blood of millions. Each discovery deepens the same mystery. How many kinds of humans walked this world before history began? And how many were lost to time? The giants of legend may not have been titans of impossible height, but they were giants of flesh and will, humans who embodied strength beyond imagination. They raced not by flood or fire, but by evolution itself. As the Ice Age ended, smaller, quicker minds survived where brute force failed. Climate changed, forests vanished, and the bones of the mighty sank into the earth. Today, archaeologists still unearth evidence that challenges what we think we know. Skeletal remains with proportions far beyond normal human variation, footprints stretching 30 inches across, monolithic tools carved for hands no longer here. Some are misinterpretations, others anomalies, but each adds a layer to the story. Because if even one is true, the entire narrative of human history bends. What frightens scientists is not the existence of giants, but what it would mean. It would mean our evolution is not linear. It would mean the stories of our ancestors were not fantasy, but memory. It would mean that we are the children of a forgotten race, carrying their bones in our museums and their myths in our minds. The camera drifts over desert canyons where ancient strata lie exposed like pages of stone. The narrator's voice slows to a whisper. Beneath our feet, the earth keeps its own archive, a record of power and extinction, written in calcium and dust. We call them fossils, relics, curiosities. But perhaps they are something more. The last witnesses to a chapter of humanity that refuses to die. As night falls, the ground cools, and the air fills with the sound of distant thunder. The voice fades. In the darkness below, under millions of tons of rock, the bones still wait. And somewhere within that silence, the truth begins to stir. The truth begins to stir. The truth is fragile when it threatens comfort. As the 19th century gave way to the modern age, curiosity about giant humans became an embarrassment for science. Universities that once welcomed debate turned their focus toward order and classification. Theories that didn't fit neatly into Darwin's elegant design were quietly erased. Newspapers that had once filled columns with wonder about giant bones began to mock those who believed. A farmer's fantasy, they wrote, a carnival hoax. Yet the public never lost interest. The idea that giants once lived among us fed something primal, the hunger to know that our world was once larger, stranger, and more alive than textbooks would allow. The Smithsonian Institution, the very temple of American science, found itself at the heart of controversy. From the late 1800s through the early 1900s, reports claimed that hundreds of giant skeletons unearthed from burial mounds were shipped to Washington, catalogued, and then quietly disappeared. Officially, the Smithsonian denied any cover-up, but the mystery deepened as accounts from field agents and amateur archaeologists described the same pattern. Discoveries made, artifacts taken, silence imposed. Was it conspiracy, or merely coincidence born of poor record-keeping and the chaos of early excavation? Either way, the story took root in the public imagination. It became legend, the giant bones that vanished. Modern archaeologists recoil from such claims, yet even they admit that science evolves through discomfort. For decades, Neanderthals were portrayed as brutish, stupid, and extinct cousins. Then, DNA revealed they had interbred with modern humans. The Denisovans were dismissed as fantasy until a single fingerbone rewrote the map of human evolution. What then makes the idea of larger hominins so impossible? Evolution does not draw straight lines. It twists, branches, and sometimes experiments with scale. For every dwarf species like Homo floresiensis, there could have been its opposite, taller, stronger, forged for a harsher world. Still, skepticism serves a purpose. It shields science from illusion. Many of the giant skeletons reported in the past were likely misidentified animal bones, mammoths mistaken for men, or deliberate hoaxes designed to sell newspapers. The infamous Cardiff giant, carved from gypsum and buried as a prank in 1869, fooled crowds for months. Such frauds poisoned the well, making honest evidence impossible to trust. Every genuine discovery thereafter was dismissed as another trick. Over time, the boundary between truth and spectacle blurred until even honest researchers feared the subject. But beyond the circus of hoaxes, the deeper question remains: why does humanity need giants at all? The answer lies not in biology but in psychology. Giants stand for everything we cannot control: the vastness of nature, the power of gods, the terror of extinction. To believe they once existed is to admit that we were small, fragile creatures in a world that did not belong to us. To deny them is to cling to mastery, to the comforting illusion that we are the pinnacle of creation. Both impulses live within us, shaping our stories as surely as bones shape flesh. As modern technology uncovers the past in finer detail, LiDAR revealing lost cities beneath jungles, DNA tracing bloodlines across millennia, the myth of giants no longer feels as distant. The more we learn, the more the boundary between legend and fact blurs. Perhaps the giants never needed to stand 12 feet tall. Perhaps they were humans who simply dwarfed us in strength, courage, or endurance. Perhaps the stories of their fall are metaphors for the moment when intellect conquered brute power, when the clever supplanted the colossal. Science and myth are not enemies. They are two eyes trying to see the same truth from different sides of time. One searches for evidence, the other remembers emotion. Between them lies the shape of something that once was, a memory of beings whose bones may be gone, but whose presence lingers in every tale told by firelight. The narrator's voice grows softer, the wind whispering through desert canyons. In the end, it may not matter whether the giants were real or imagined. What matters is that we still feel them watching from the dark edge of memory, reminding us that we too will one day become myth. And somewhere, under layers of rock and disbelief, the earth keeps its quiet promise. Nothing buried stays hidden forever. The story of humanity, as science tells it, is a story of one species rising above all others. But beneath that triumphant arc lies a hidden forest of branches, each one a different kind of human, each one ending in silence. For most of history, we believed ourselves alone, the final and only inheritors of the earth. Then came the bones, the genes, the whispers from the deep caves that changed everything. Once, we were many. Long before written words, the world belonged to a family of human kinds. There were the Neanderthals, stocky and powerful, who ruled the cold plains of Europe. There were the Denisovans, whose fragments were found in the frozen heart of Siberia, but whose genetic signature reaches across the Pacific into the blood of Melanesia. There were the mysterious Homo floresiensis of Indonesia, tiny, agile, their brains no larger than a grapefruit. And there were others, even less understood. Homo naledi, buried deep within South African caves, their bones arranged as if by ritual. Homo heidelbergensis, tall and strong, the hunter who may have stood as the true giant among men. Each of them carried the spark of humanity. Each of them looked at fire and saw warmth, looked at the stars and saw meaning. Yet, none survived. We, Homo sapiens, emerged last and endured longest. Why? Some say it was intelligence, our ability to plan, to imagine, to tell stories. But perhaps it was something darker, a capacity for dominance, for erasure. To rise, we had to watch others fall. In the fossil record, traces of extraordinary size appear like echoes of the myths we tell. The jaw of a man found in Greece, so large it dwarfed that of a modern soldier. The femur of a heidelbergensis from Africa, thick as a club. These are not the 12-foot titans of legend, but they are the bones of beings built for endurance, power, and survival. If you stood before one, you would feel the truth of the word giant, not in height, but in presence. Gigantopithecus, the ape that once roamed the forests of ancient China, stood 3 meters tall and weighed half a ton. Though not human, its time overlapped with our earliest ancestors. Some believe that its image may have haunted humanity's oldest memories, the origin of the ogres, the wild men, the forest spirits that populate every continent's folklore. To early humans, glimpsing such a creature even once could birth 1,000 myths. Genetic evidence now shows that we carry within us traces of those other humans. In every modern person of European descent, a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA persists. In those of Pacific and Asian ancestry, Denisovan blood still flows. We are not pure. We are mosaics, patchworks of survival. That means the giants never truly vanished. They were absorbed, transformed, remembered in the architecture of our very cells. When you look in the mirror, You are seeing the sum of every kind of human that came before. Yet there are gaps that science cannot fill. Bones dissolve, genomes fade, whole lineages disappear without trace. Between the known species there may have been others, taller, stronger, built for climates we have long forgotten. The record of the Earth is imperfect, eroded by time and accident. What remains are fragments, whispers of a greater story that once spanned the globe. The narrator's voice deepens, steady and low. Perhaps the giants of legend were never separate from us at all. Perhaps they were our brothers, our cousins, our lost reflections in the mirror of time. When their bones sank into the mud, their memory rose into the sky, carried on the breath of stories. To deny them is to deny a part of ourselves. Night settles over the savannah. Stars shimmer above the ancient plain where the first hunters walked. Their footprints still rest in the dust, alongside those of beasts long gone. Somewhere among them, the prints grow larger. Steps of another kind of human, heavier, slower, but no less alive. The camera drifts upward, revealing the vastness of the land, the weight of time pressing on everything. The voice returns, almost a whisper now. We have always searched for giants, yet we are only beginning to understand that the greatest mystery lies not in their existence, but in what they left behind. In the next breath of history, we will look closer at those lost branches, to the lineages that ended too soon, and the secrets their bones still keep. The secrets there lie hidden not only in caves and clay, but within us. The human story is not a single shining thread. It is a web, torn and mended countless times. For every branch that flourished, another broke and fell into darkness. Those fallen lineages, the ones erased by climate, hunger, or our own violence, are the true ghosts that haunt our evolution. Their silence fills the gaps between myth and memory, where the giants still breathe. When scientists first began sequencing ancient DNA, they expected clarity. Instead, they found a storm. The human genome was not pure or linear. It was tangled with the signatures of others. Pieces of Neanderthal code lay stitched into our chromosomes like forgotten verses. Denisovan genes appeared in the high-altitude peoples of Tibet, giving them the ability to survive thin air. What else might linger there, unnamed and unclassified? Echoes of humans we have never found. Each new discovery deepens the mystery. Each reveals that the idea of a pure Homo sapiens never existed. We are the children of mingling bloodlines, of love and conflict across vanished frontiers. In this tangled ancestry, whispers of the giants return. Imagine a world of contact zones, valleys where tribes of Homo sapiens met the last of the Neanderthals. Mountains where Denisovans guarded their cold citadels, islands where strange small humans built fires under alien stars. Among them, perhaps, were others, taller, stronger, unseen by modern eyes. Their bodies left no fossils, only faint imprints in our myths. Beings too great to endure, whose strength could not outlast time. Paleoanthropologists speak of ghost species, hominins inferred only from genetic traces, their bones never found. These invisible relatives are the lost branches of our family tree. Somewhere between the Neanderthal and the modern human may have stood a population larger and more robust. Their genome dissolved into ours until all that remains are fragments too small to name. If they were real, then the legends of ancient giants might be the faint cultural memory of those encounters. The last time two kinds of humanity looked into each other's eyes, and saw themselves reflected at different scales. The line between science and myth begins to blur again. For what is myth but memory transformed by fear and awe? When a small tribe of modern humans stood before a being half again their size, with a chest broad as an ox and arms like tree trunks, they saw gods. When that being vanished, they told stories to keep its presence alive. Over millennia, those stories hardened into legend. The Bible called them Nephilim. The Greeks named them Titans. The Polynesians sang of Tumatauenga, the warrior giant who defied the heavens. The memory persisted, stripped of fact but heavy with truth. Even today, the earth sometimes yields evidence that refuses to fit. In a cave in the Caucasus, teeth too large for any known species. In China, a massive jawbone with proportions unseen in any living human. In the Pacific, bones reburied by locals who speak quietly of the tall ones who came before. Each fragment fuels both belief and denial, the twin engines of curiosity. Science demands proof, myth demands meaning. Between them stands humanity, unable to let go of either. Perhaps that is the real purpose of the giants. To remind us that evolution is not finished, that we are not the masters of history but its fleeting inheritors. The lost branches are not failures but experiments, each testing what it means to be human. Some sought strength, some cunning, some endurance. We are the outcome of all of them, shaped by their victories and haunted by their extinction. Their bones built the ground beneath our feet. Their stories built the architecture of our imagination. The camera moves through a dark forest, mist curling around ancient stones. In the distance, faint drumming echoes, a heartbeat, or the memory of one. The narrator's voice softens. The giants may be gone, but their shadow still walks beside us. We carry their genes, their myths, their ghosts. They remind us that humanity is not a species, but a symphony of many voices, many bodies, all rising and fading in time. Somewhere in the darkness, thunder rolls. The voice concludes low and measured. To unravel the mystery of the giants is to confront the truth of our own creation, that we are made not from one story, but from many. Some written in blood, some in stone, and some in the silence between. Long after the bones had turned to dust, the stones remained. Across every continent, the earth is scarred by structures so vast, so heavy, and so precise that they defy the limits of the people we believe built them. Giant blocks weighing hundreds of tons fit together with surgical perfection, lifted without cranes, aligned to stars visible only through millennia of patient observation. Who shaped them? And why? The first travelers to Egypt stood before the Great Pyramid and felt the same disbelief that echoes through us today. More than 2 million limestone blocks, some weighing 70 tons, stacked into a perfect geometric mountain. In Lebanon, the quarry of Baalbek holds the stone of the pregnant woman, an unfinished monolith of 1,000 tons, lying as if forgotten by gods too strong to care. In Peru, the fortress of Sacsayhuaman rises from living rock, its walls cut in zigzag patterns of interlocking boulders that no blade can slide between. In Japan, the megaliths of Asuka bear faces too smooth, too deliberate for erosion alone. In every corner of the world, the same fingerprints, stones too large for the tools of their age. Archaeologists have explanations, levers, ramps, countless hands over endless years. Yet even among them, awe remains. To imagine tens of thousands of workers carving and hauling such masses with nothing but rope and faith is itself a kind of miracle. The question is not whether it could be done, but why it was done. Why choose stones that defy human scale when smaller ones would suffice? The answer may lie not in engineering but in memory. Monuments speak the language of permanence. To build beyond human measure is to say, we were here, and greater than you will ever know. In ancient myths, giants and gods were the builders of these walls. The Greeks said that Cyclopes piled the stones of Mycenae. The Irish spoke of Fomorians who raised fortresses before the flood. The Maya credited their temples to the Alukshab, spirits of the Tall Ones. In the Middle East, old legends claimed that Nimrod and the Nephilim built the Tower of Babel, reaching for the heavens until divine wrath brought it down. Even in the Old Testament, the Book of Numbers describes men so great that the Israelites saw themselves as grasshoppers beside them. The stones became their testament, the last monuments of a vanished race. Modern historians dismiss these tales as metaphor, but sometimes myth is the only tool ancient people had to describe awe. When a shepherd stumbled upon a wall that dwarfed him, when a traveler stood beneath an arch that brushed the clouds, the explanation came easily. Giants built this. Over centuries, as knowledge faded, the attribution hardened into belief. Yet beneath the poetry, the question still hums. How did our ancestors move the unmovable? LiDAR scans and geological studies reveal that many megalithic sites predate the civilizations credited with them. The Great Stones of Giza may rest atop foundations older than the dynasties themselves. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, carved 12,000 years ago, rises from a time when humanity was thought to be no more than hunters. Each discovery pushes the dawn of civilization further back, as though we are chasing the ghost of a forgotten age, one where strength and knowledge coexisted in ways we no longer understand. Perhaps the builders were not giants of bone, but giants of mind, people whose understanding of balance, vibration, and gravity bordered on the supernatural to us. Or perhaps they were both. The physics of the ancient world may have relied not only on muscle but on cooperation, tens of thousands moving as one, guided by tradition older than memory. In such unity, the line between man and myth blurs. 1,000 hands can move mountains. 1,000 hearts can create a god. Still, there are anomalies that mock explanation. Massive handprints fused into solid rock, footprints pressed into volcanic stone measuring nearly 3 feet long, isolated megaliths quarried miles from their resting place with no record of their journey. Each one invites the same question whispered through time. Were these the works of men, or remnants of something more? As twilight bleeds across the stones of Baalbek, shadows stretch like the silhouettes of the builders themselves. The narrator's voice softens, almost reverent. The earth remembers weight. It remembers every hand that touched it, every echo of a hammer long gone. In the silence between stones, we can almost hear the breath of the giants. The camera lingers on a monolith glowing under the setting sun. Wind stirs dust into gold. Somewhere beyond the horizon lies the answer, half buried in the ruins of impossible ambition. The voice fades into darkness. The monuments do not speak, yet they stand as witnesses, reminders that before us walked beings who measured the world in a different scale. beings who measured the world in a different scale. What were they? The question has haunted every civilization that rose among the ruins of the last. We look upon the Cyclopean walls, the vast terraces carved into living rock, the silent statues with eyes that follow the stars, and we sense intelligence, not alien, but ancient, immense, and familiar. Whoever built them understood the world not as we do, in fragments and theories, but as a single, breathing whole. Their work was not architecture, it was memory written in stone. The old myths claim the builders were gods. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, tall beings who descended from the heavens to shape humanity and teach the arts of civilization. In Mesoamerica, the Toltecs remembered the Quinametsin, giants who raised cities before being destroyed by the wrath of the gods. In Norse sagas, the frost giants built Asgard's walls, paid with their lives for their skill. Everywhere the pattern repeats. The monuments are born from those too powerful to coexist with men. The gods fall, the giants vanish, and their stones remain. But perhaps the truth was never divine. Perhaps the giants were flesh and bone, remnants of an age when humanity took many forms. If Homo heidelbergensis stood head and shoulders above our ancestors, if Gigantopithecus brushed the canopy of Asia's forests, might there have been others, builders whose hands shaped the world's first temples before fading into legend? As ice melted and seas rose, their cities would have drowned, leaving only peaks and plateaus to hint at their existence. What survives above the waterline are the highest works of their craft, misattributed to cultures that came long after. Archaeologists uncover alignment after alignment, the pyramids of Giza mirroring Orion's belt, the megaliths of Stonehenge tracking solstices with impossible precision, the Nazca lines stretching into geometric perfection visible only from the sky. Skeptics insist this is coincidence, the outcome of countless hands guided by patience and ritual. Yet there is a rhythm here, a unity of design that spans the globe. It is as though someone, somewhere, once whispered the same blueprint to every tribe. Mark the heavens upon the earth, and let your stones remember what time will forget. If the builders were human, then they were giants in knowledge, their minds as vast as the monuments they raised. But if they were something else, older, stronger, closer to the myths of our ancestors, then our history is far younger than we believe. Some scientists now suggest that civilization did not begin suddenly in Mesopotamia, but flickered in many places long before: Turkey, Peru, Indonesia, under the ice of Antarctica. Perhaps these scattered sparks were the last breath of an earlier world, one destroyed by flood, comet, or its own arrogance. When the survivors emerged, diminished and half-remembering, they told stories of the ones who came before, the tall ones, the builders, the gods. To early humans, the difference between a teacher and a deity was only scale, a being who could move stones heavier than a herd of mammoths, who could map the sky with naked eyes, who could harness sound or magnetism or forces now forgotten. Such a being would appear divine. Over generations, memory became worship, and worship hardened into myth. The true builders vanished, but their legend grew taller with each retelling. In temples carved into cliffs, in the resonance of granite chambers, in the symmetry of cities aligned to stars, we hear the same voice. It says, "Remember us." Not in words, but in geometry, in weight, in the vibration of stone that outlives flesh. The monuments are not proof of gods, they are proof of continuity, of a knowledge passed like a torch through ages of fire and forgetting. The camera glides across the ancient world, Egypt's sands, Peru's ridges, the jungles of Cambodia, the drowned ruins off Yonaguni's coast. The narrator's voice lingers. Maybe the giants never left. Maybe they built so well that their presence endures in every stone that resists time. Their civilization became the skeleton of ours. Their myths became our origins. At the edge of twilight, the scene fades to black. The wind carries a whisper over the ruins. We were here. We built. We remembered. And as night falls, the stars above seem to trace those same ancient lines again, echoing the pattern carved on earth by hands now lost. There are moments in the earth's long memory when silence breaks into thunder. Entire worlds vanish overnight. Cities swallowed by the sea, mountains split open, skies darkened by ash. Across every ancient civilization, this cataclysm carries one name: the Great Flood. In myth, it is punishment, renewal, divine judgment. In geology, it is the memory of ice melting, of oceans rising hundreds of feet, of a planet remade by water. Somewhere between those two truths lies the event that ended the age of the giants. From the tablets of Mesopotamia to the pyramids of Mexico, the same story repeats with uncanny precision. The Sumerians wrote of Utnapishtim, the man who survived a flood sent to destroy the gods' creations. The Hebrews told of Noah, the Greeks of Deucalion and Pyrrha, the Hindus of Manu, saved by a fish who guided his boat to the mountains. Even far from the cradle of civilization, in the oral histories of the Hopi, the Maori, and the Dogon, floods wiped clean a world ruled by beings of great size and power. How could such a memory be shared by those who never met? Around 12,000 years ago, the Ice Age drew its final breath. Sheets of ice thicker than cities collapsed, releasing oceans locked in frozen captivity for millennia. The younger Dryas came and went in a storm of fire and meltwater. Rivers rose, continents drowned, and the face of the earth shifted forever. In that chaos, entire ecosystems vanished, and with them, the last remnants of the world that gave birth to the myths of giants. Archaeologists trace the end of megalithic construction to this same period. Göbekli Tepe was buried deliberately, as if its builders knew what was coming. The fertile plains that would become the Persian Gulf sank beneath rising seas. Legends say that Atlantis fell, its towers swallowed by waves, its wisdom scattered among survivors. Beneath the Indian Ocean, sonar reveals structures that might be man-made, streets and terraces now home to coral. Whether these were true cities or tricks of geology hardly matters. The resonance of the idea remains. A world once great, drowned by its own hubris or by nature's indifference. The myths describe the giants as corrupt, violent, arrogant. In the Book of Enoch, they consume the earth, drinking its blood and teaching forbidden arts to men. The flood is sent to cleanse their stain. Yet behind that morality tale lies something older and colder, the pattern of extinction. Nature erases without malice. The giants may not have fallen to sin, but to the slow cruelty of climate. When the ice melted and forests spread, their size became their doom. Strength turned to burden. Adaptation became obsolescence. Still, their memory clings to the mountains that survived the deluge. In Turkey, Ararat rises where Noah's Ark is said to have rested. In the Andes, the Aymara speak of Viracocha, a giant who emerged after the flood to repopulate the world. In the Pacific, islanders remember the first builders, tall as trees, who vanished when the sea rose to claim their stone temples. The flood was not only an ending, it was a reset, a dividing line between eras. Before the waters, a world of titans. After, a world of men. Scientists find evidence of rapid climate change at the same moment those stories begin. Meltwater pulses, volcanic eruptions, a comet impact near Greenland, perhaps. If memory could be carried through generations, what would it sound like after 10,000 years? It would sound like myth, polished by fear and faith, until all that remains is truth in disguise. The flood that wiped away the giants was real, though its victims may have been human, animal, or entire civilizations now erased from the map. At dusk, the film cuts to roaring waves, lightning flashes over a drowned landscape. The narrator speaks quietly, almost tenderly. Every age believes it will last forever. Every species thinks the world belongs to it. But time is patient, and the sea remembers. When the waters rose, they did not simply destroy, they rewrote. And in that rewriting, the giants slipped from history into legend, leaving only stones and stories to tell us they had been. The screen darkens to black water flecked with stars. The voice fades. From the depths, a single echo rises. The sound of something ancient, exhaling its final breath beneath the sea. When the waters finally withdrew, the world that emerged was younger, emptier, and infinitely quieter. The seas had swallowed continents. Mountains had become islands. The old coastlines lay hidden beneath 100 meters of salt and shadow. Yet the stories insist that not everything drowned. Among the survivors of the great cataclysm, there were said to be remnants of the old race, giants who refused to die, who climbed to the peaks before the flood rose, or retreated deep into the earth where fire still glowed. From the Andes to the Himalayas, from the Caucasus to the Pacific, people tell of the first ones who endured. The Inca spoke of the Pururaucas, stone warriors brought to life by the god Viracocha, who turned to stone again when the flood ended. The Hopi remembered the Palatquapi, beings of great height and light who emerged from the underworld after the cleansing of the world. In Central Asia, ancient Mongols whispered of mountain spirits, tall and pale, dwelling among the eternal snows. Even in the Bible's aftermath, Genesis mentions the Anakim, giants who survived beyond the flood, their lineage persisting in Canaan, terrifying the Israelites generations later. Skeptics call these myths echoes, the psychological need to keep continuity after catastrophe. But across cultures, the pattern is too precise. There are always survivors, always the tall ones, the watchers, the hidden teachers who rebuild civilization's spark. Some legends speak of them helping humankind, showing the survivors how to farm, how to read the stars, how to carve stone again. In Sumer, the first kings were said to be descended from beings who ruled before the flood. In Egypt, Thoth carried the wisdom of a world drowned by water. In Greece, Prometheus defied Zeus to give fire back to men. The line between gods and giants blurs until both become one idea: memory personified. Science quietly acknowledges that survivors existed, though not of mythic stature, but of flesh and will. Pockets of Neanderthals clung to life in Europe's caves long after their kind had faded elsewhere. Denisovans endured in the mountains of Siberia and Tibet, leaving their genetic fingerprints in the DNA of living people. Perhaps among those isolated groups were individuals of unusual size, relics of Ice Age adaptation who lingered until history's threshold. To those who met them, their appearance would have seemed supernatural, relics of an age humanity thought destroyed. In the highlands of Sardinia, archaeologists uncover massive tombs the locals call Domus de Janus, houses of the fairies, but the older generation still calls them tombs of the giants. In the Caucasus, shepherds point to megalithic dolmens and say they were made by people who walked with mountains. In North America, tribes speak of red-haired giants who retreated into caves, their bones discovered and sealed again by elders. Every culture guards the same uneasy truth. The flood cleansed the world, but it did not empty it. Something remained, older, stronger, silent. There is a strange comfort in imagining that the ancient world did not end completely, that fragments of its greatness survived to guide what came after. Yet, the same comfort carries dread. If they endured, where did they go? Some say the survivors retreated into the deep places of the earth, beneath mountains and deserts, building halls of stone lit by eternal fire. Others say they crossed the seas to forgotten islands, or fell into sleep, waiting for the world to forget them. Modern researchers search the deep ocean ridges and cave networks for clues. Strange tunnels, vast and unnaturally smooth, wind beneath South America's Andes. Submerged terraces off Japan's coast rise in patterns too regular for accident. In each discovery, science hesitates to decide between geology and architecture. But for those who remember the old stories, these places are the graves of the survivors, or their refuges. The narrator's voice lowers, reflective and grave. When the flood ended, humanity began again, smaller and weaker, but armed with memory. The survivors of the deluge, whether giants of flesh or giants of knowledge, left the world as their inheritance. They became the missing link between myth and history, the reason we remember more than we should. Every great culture carries a spark that feels older than itself, a whisper that says, "This has all happened before." The camera follows the line of an ancient river disappearing into mist. The water is calm now, but the earth beneath still bears the scars of the storm. The voice fades into the sound of wind through stone. Perhaps the giants never died in the flood. Perhaps they became its witnesses, living deep in the mountains, waiting for the sea to rise again. The story of giants has always lived outside the laboratory, until now. For centuries, the question of their existence rested on stones and legends, not on microscopes and machines. But in the quiet hum of genetic sequencing labs, scientists have begun uncovering something astonishing: the ghosts of ancient beings still walking within us, encoded not in myth, but in DNA. Every human alive today carries within them fragments of other humans, species once thought extinct, absorbed into our blood through contact, conflict, and love. When the first full human genomes were mapped, researchers expected uniformity, a single story written in 4 letters of genetic code. What they found instead was a chorus. Neanderthal genes in Europeans and Asians, Denisovan genes in Pacific Islanders and Tibetans. Even now, Strange stretches of DNA appear that match nothing known, as if the Earth itself remembers species science has yet to name. These fragments are not inert relics. They shape our faces, our immune systems, our very breath. Denisovan genes allow Tibetans to survive in the thin air of high mountains. Neanderthal DNA influences how our bodies handle fat and sunlight. We are, in every sense, hybrids of forgotten worlds. If those ancient cousins could pass their traits into us, could they also pass something greater, an echo of the giants? The myth of beings larger, stronger, longer-lived might not be fantasy, but the distorted memory of genetic variation. The fossil record tells of humans whose bodies exceeded ours in strength. Homo heidelbergensis, broad-shouldered and tall. Homo rhodesiensis, built like a fortress. Even Neanderthals, whose bones suggest muscles of staggering density. Evolution experiments in size as easily as in color or shape. Within those experiments, traces may persist, dormant possibilities hidden in code. The human genome is a library written by catastrophe. Each strand of DNA bears the scars of floods, famines, migrations, and encounters with others like us but not us. Among its billions of letters, scientists have found segments they call ghost lineages, genetic sequences that come from no known species. These ghost fragments may be the last whispers of the lost branches, the invisible giants of prehistory. They linger like fingerprints on glass, evidence that our past was more crowded, more complex than we can imagine. To the believer in myth, this is revelation. The giants never vanished. They dissolved into us. Their endurance became ours. Their strength, diluted but eternal, pulses in every heartbeat. To the scientist, the idea is metaphor, but the data is real. Modern humans are a tapestry of the extinct. We are walking fossils, carrying not just genes but the memories of entire species written in the language of life. It is not only size that binds us to the giants, but longevity. Some genetic mutations found in ancient DNA relate to bone density, height, and growth hormones. Others affect aging and disease resistance. The same genes that made some early humans large might have made others resilient, able to survive where frailer forms perished. Those traits, passed down through countless generations, became myths of superhuman beings who lived for centuries. In the memory of small frightened tribes, their descendants became gods. And yet, our genome is also a graveyard. For every gene that survived, 1,000 were lost. The DNA of unknown hominins lies fragmented, unrecognizable, overwritten by time. When scientists compare modern human DNA with that of Neanderthals and Denisovans, gaps appear, empty spaces that hint at others, species whose bones have never been found, but whose presence is undeniable. These are the genetic shadows of prehistory, the proof that our family tree was once a forest of giants, now burned to stumps by extinction. As the camera drifts over microscopic imagery, spirals of double helix shimmering like galaxies, the narrator's voice lowers to a near whisper. Inside every human cell is a record of all who came before. The giants are not gone. They are encoded in the rhythm of our breath, the curve of our bones, the resilience of our kind. Myth calls them gods. Science calls them ancestors. The difference is only language. Outside the time, laboratory, the wind howls through canyons older than civilization. The stones remember their builders, and our blood remembers them too. The voice fades. The search for giants no longer looks to mountains or tombs. It looks within, to the silent scripture written in every human heart. If the DNA of giants still flows through us, then perhaps the ancient story has never truly ended. Even today, scattered among billions of ordinary bodies, there are echoes, people born with the size, strength, and stature that once defined the myths of old. They are not legends carved in stone, but living reminders that evolution is not finished. The human form still experiments with scale. Modern medicine calls it gigantism or acromegaly, conditions born from excess growth hormone or rare genetic mutations. Yet when one stands before a person 7 or 8 feet tall, a quiet, ancient instinct stirs. The same awe that filled the hearts of those who once looked up to the Titans. In the 19th century, a man named Charles Byrne, the Irish giant, stood nearly 8 feet tall. His bones, preserved in a London museum, reveal abnormalities in the pituitary gland, a small knot of tissue controlling growth. In Turkey, the towering Sultan Kosen, living today, reaches 8 feet 3 inches, an echo of those same biological anomalies. Science measures them in hormones and millimeters, but their presence feels older, as if some fragment of ancient code flickered awake. Across generations, these giants have been both feared and revered. In medieval Europe, stories of saints and warriors grew from real bodies, men whose unnatural height was taken as proof of divine favor or curse. The Norse spoke of warriors so large that their armor became relics after death. In the South Pacific, tribal memory recalls visitors as tall as palm trees, gentle teachers who vanished into the sea. Wherever they appear, giants challenge the boundary between myth and nature, demanding that we look again at what it means to be human. Science offers answers both clear and humbling. Height, strength, and endurance are governed by hundreds of genes interacting with environment and chance. Each body is an experiment. A mutation that increases growth might help in one age, hinder in another. The same variability that produced Homo floresiensis, the small hobbits of Indonesia, could, in a different climate, have produced their opposites. Evolution does not move toward perfection. It wanders. Perhaps somewhere in that wandering lies the origin of our myths. Yet, in our fascination with modern giants, there is something deeper than curiosity. They remind us of proportion, the feeling of standing before something greater. In an age where machines lift mountains and screens shrink the universe into a palm, the presence of a living giant restores scale. It reconnects us to the awe our ancestors felt before megaliths and mountains, to the fear and wonder of a world too vast to own. Scientists sometimes joke that humanity's greatest laboratory is the genome itself, an ongoing experiment without control group. If that is true, then the giants among us are results of an ancient design still running its course. The gene that makes one man tall could, in another environment, have made a species colossal. Perhaps the line between abnormality and ancestry is thinner than we think. In the deep archives of medical history, drawings and measurements of unusual skeletons fill old notebooks. Some show heights that strain belief, 9 feet, 10, even more. Many have been reclassified, others lost. Each record, true or false, feeds the same hunger to connect ourselves to something larger, to find proof that the stories told by our ancestors were not merely dreams. The narrator's voice softens, reflective and human. Maybe giants are not gone. Maybe they are simply scattered, born one by one into a world too small for them. Their rarity keeps the legend alive. Their existence, no matter how explained, keeps the question open. If even one body carries the imprint of ancient size, then the story continues. In the final image, a child stands beside a modern giant gazing upward. Between them stretches the invisible thread of inheritance, from the Ice Age to now. The camera pulls back, rising above cities that glow like constellations, each window a spark of DNA carrying ancient fire. The voice returns, low and steady. Giants do not belong only to the past. They walk among us still, fragile, extraordinary, and human. Before there were empires, before there were kings, there was only survival. The Ice Age still held the world in its frozen grip. Glaciers stretched like the bones of sleeping gods, and winds howled across empty plains. In that ancient silence, two kinds of beings walked the same earth. Modern humans, fragile and clever, and others, stronger, older, carved by colder suns. To meet one another in that wilderness was not discovery. It was confrontation. Imagine a small band of Homo sapiens huddled beside a fire, their faces painted with ash, their weapons carved from stone and bone. Out beyond the light, something moves, heavy, deliberate, unhurried. The ground trembles slightly beneath its steps. A figure emerges from the fog, shoulders broad as a tree trunk, eyes glinting amber in the glow. To these humans, the stranger is a giant. Whether Neanderthal, Denisovan, or another lineage lost to time, the effect is the same. Awe, laced with terror. Archaeology hints that such meetings were real. In caves from Spain to Siberia, tools of modern humans lie beside those of their ancient cousins, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in layers of conquest. The bones tell stories of coexistence, of interbreeding, of violence. A fracture in a Neanderthal skull may be a wound from a human weapon, or the mark of a shared hunt gone wrong. Fire, the great equalizer, became both shield and lure. It warmed, it cooked, it revealed. The glow that comforted one tribe drew the eyes of another. The landscape itself was a battleground. Giant predators roamed the tundra, short-faced bears taller than horses, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves. To survive here, size was an advantage, but intelligence was salvation. The giants of the older kind relied on strength and instinct. The smaller newcomers relied on cooperation and imagination. One built tools of raw power, the other built traps of cunning. When the two met, the question of who hunted whom was never simple. Legends from the world's edges echo this tension. The Inuit speak of the Adlet, towering red beings who hunted men across the ice. The Paiute tell of the Siteka, cannibal giants who ruled before the tribes and were burned in their caves. In the Solomon Islands, elders whisper of the Guadalcanal giants, hairy and human-like, who still stalked the highlands. Such stories may preserve the memory of encounters that ended in fear and blood, when early humans faced creatures that looked like themselves but stood apart, immense and unknowable. Even in art, the memory remains. Deep within French caves, paintings show not only animals but towering figures beside smaller ones, shapes that scholars dismiss as symbolic. Yet to the people who painted them, perhaps these were records, testimonies of a world shared uneasily with others. The artists may have seen the giants with their own eyes, then sealed their memory in pigment to ensure they would not be forgotten. In this theater of survival, giants were not gods. They were neighbors, rivals, and sometimes prey. Strength alone was not enough. The human brain became its own weapon, forging alliances, languages, and strategies. The smaller species learned to hunt as one mind. The larger learned too slowly. Over centuries, the balance shifted. The hunters became the hunted. The giants faded first from the plains, then from the mountains, retreating into myth as their bones cooled beneath the soil. But perhaps they never truly vanished. Some scientists suggest that small populations of archaic humans survived longer than we thought. Pockets of Neanderthals in Gibraltar's caves, Denisovans in the mountains of Tibet, isolated groups hidden by the immensity of wilderness. For early sapiens who wandered too far, the sight of such survivors must have been a vision of the past refusing to die. The narrator's voice deepens, steady as a heartbeat. We call them monsters now because it is easier than calling them kin. Yet in the reflection of their eyes, our ancestors saw both what they were and what they might become. Every legend of man versus giant is a parable of evolution itself, the moment when one kind of human looked upon another and chose to inherit the world. Snow begins to fall over a wind-swept valley. The last fire burns low. Somewhere beyond the light, the sound of a deep breath echoes through the dark. The voice fades to silence. The hunt is over, but the story has only begun. For a brief and fragile moment in prehistory, more than one kind of human shared the earth. It was an age balanced on a knife's edge, neither war nor peace, but something in between. In the caves of Europe and the high plateaus of Asia, Homo sapiens and their larger cousins crossed paths, traded glances, and perhaps traded blood. Whether they met as enemies or as kin is a question time refuses to answer. Yet every myth that speaks of giants and men locked in battle may be an echo of those meetings, flickers of a memory too ancient to name. Some archaeologists believe that cooperation came first. Evidence of shared habitats suggests that early sapiens and Neanderthals hunted the same prey, drank from the same rivers, even exchanged tools. A blade shaped in the style of one species sometimes turns up in the settlement of another, as if knowledge passed between them. Fire pits layered with different ashes hint at shared occupation. One group leaves, another arrives, and sometimes both stay. In those moments of peace, humanity was not one tribe, but many, neighbors beneath the same cold sky. But peace in a world of scarcity is temporary. Ice tightened its grip, prey grew thin, and territory became life itself. To survive, one lineage had to vanish. Genetic studies show that where Homo sapiens spread, others retreated. Yet the DNA of those others lingers within us, silent testimony that before they disappeared, there was union as well as war. A child born of two kinds of human would have been both bridge and omen, living proof that boundaries could blur. Perhaps the first Half-giants were not monsters at all, but the last attempt of a dying species to remain part of the future. As the millennia passed, stories began to grow around those ancient encounters. Across the Mediterranean, the Greeks told of the Gigantomachy, the great war between gods and giants, where thunder and fire reshaped the world. In the Near East, the Book of Enoch described the Nephilim as offspring of divine beings and human women, cast out for their violence. In Ireland, Finn MacCool raised fortresses to keep his land from invaders as tall as towers. Each tale beneath its poetry hides the same truth: memory of conflict between kinds of men. Violence is not the only inheritance of those days. Alongside war came reverence. To the small and the weak, the giants were terrifying but sacred. They represented endurance, a link to a time when strength alone ruled. Some tribes worshipped them, others hunted them as demons. In either case, they could never be ignored. The coexistence of giant and man became the seed of our oldest moral lessons about pride, power, and the cost of survival. Modern anthropology views these myths not as history but as psychology, humanity's way of explaining the disappearance of its closest relatives. When the last Neanderthal vanished, there must have been guilt buried among the victors. The survivors carried that guilt as legend. To call the fallen giants was to grant them dignity. To imagine wars of gods and titans was to give meaning to extinction. Still, there are traces of something more than metaphor. Skeletons of unusual size, 7, 8, sometimes 9 feet tall, found among ordinary graves. Massive stone tools in layers dated far younger than their supposed makers. Carvings that depict men facing adversaries twice their height. Some may be exaggeration, some ritual art, but together they whisper that coexistence was not always peaceful. Where cultures overlap in both myth and soil, violence often lies beneath. The narrator's voice slows, heavy with reflection. Every myth of giants falling beneath the blows of men is a mirror of evolution itself, a struggle not between good and evil, but between survival and extinction. The victors tell the story. The defeated become monsters, yet in our blood both remain. The camera drifts through the flickering light of a campfire, its flames mirrored in the eyes of two figures, one tall, one small, both human. For a moment, they share the warmth, divided only by the coming dawn. When the light returns, one will rule the world, and the other will fade into legend. The wind sighs through the grass, carrying a voice that sounds like memory. The wars between giants and men never ended. They simply moved inside us, the ancient rivalry between what we were and what we might have been. History is written by the survivors, but it is preserved by the gatekeepers. Every age has them, the scribes, the priests, the institutions that decide which truths become fact and which are left to die in silence. For the story of the giants, that silence has been deafening. In the age of reason, belief in them became a mark of ignorance. What could not be catalogued or measured was dismissed, and the ancient memory of beings larger than life was buried beneath layers of ridicule and dust. The 19th century was a golden age of discovery and of denial. Across America, as settlers plowed fields and dug canals, strange bones surfaced from the earth. Jawbones so large they could encase a human skull, femurs as long as a man's arm, skulls with double rows of teeth. Newspapers printed their images beside biblical references to the Nephilim. Ministers proclaimed them proof of Scripture. But as quickly as the excitement grew, it was smothered. The Smithsonian Institution, the newly formed guardian of the nation's scientific legacy, began to collect and catalog thousands of these finds. Within years, the reports stopped, the bones were gone, the records sealed, and the conversation ended. Was it conspiracy or coincidence? Official statements said that the remains were misidentified animal fossils, mammoth bones mistaken for men. Others whispered of a quiet policy to suppress anything that might challenge the narrative of human origins. To question was to risk ridicule, to be cast out of academia's warm light into the cold realm of myth. Thus, the story of the giants moved underground, passed among amateurs and dreamers, its evidence scattered in forgotten archives. But not all silence is malice. Science itself is cautious by nature. For every genuine discovery there were hoaxes: the Cardiff giant, the petrified fossil men, the traveling sideshows that made profit from wonder. Each fraud poisoned the well a little more. Serious scholars recoiled, unwilling to touch a subject tainted by spectacle. In protecting truth, they also buried possibility. Still, the pattern is familiar. Throughout history, inconvenient evidence has a way of disappearing. Ancient maps showing coastlines now submerged, artifacts that predate accepted timelines, skeletal remains reburied without study because they did not fit. These are the casualties of certainty. A civilization sure of its story has no room for anomalies. The myths of giants remind us that knowledge, like geology, layers itself over time, each generation burying the doubts of the last. In the 20th century, as anthropology solidified its authority, the giants became relics of superstition. Textbooks told a simpler tale: one species, one rise, one destiny. Yet in the cracks of that narrative, dissent survived. Local historians kept clippings of forgotten digs. Farmers remembered what their grandfathers saw lifted from the ground. Even a few archaeologists, their careers already spent, whispered of anomalies too strange to publish. The Smithsonian myth. The Smithsonian myth endured because, like all good myths, it answered an unease we could not dismiss, the sense that the official story was too clean, too small for the vastness of our past. Skepticism, after all, is a blade that cuts both ways. It protects us from deception, but can also sever us from wonder. The giants live at the edge of that blade, balanced between faith and fact. To believe without proof is folly. To deny without question is blindness. Somewhere in that fragile space, truth waits. The narrator's voice lowers to a murmur, almost confessional. We like to think that knowledge grows in a straight line, from darkness to light, from myth to science. But knowledge is human, and humans fear what they cannot control. Sometimes the things we bury are not lies, but possibilities too large to manage. The camera moves through dim museum corridors, glass cases gleaming like coffins. Beneath each label lies certainty, and beneath that, silence. Dust drifts through shafts of light. Somewhere beyond the glass, unseen, the bones of giants sleep in the dark. The voice fades. History is not just what we remember. It is what we are allowed to remember. And every locked drawer, every missing crate, may be another verse in the story we refuse to tell. History does not keep its secrets well. Even the things we try to forget leave shadows, and sometimes the truth hides not in darkness, but in daylight, too large, too ancient, too strange for us to see clearly. The story of the giants may never have been erased at all. It may simply be written in a language we stopped understanding. In deserts, jungles, and mountains across the world, new eyes are opening. Eyes made of light, lasers, and code. LiDAR scanning, designed to strip away vegetation and time, now reveals what generations of explorers could only dream of. Entire cities, hidden beneath soil and forest. In Guatemala, the technology exposed tens of thousands of Mayan structures sprawling across the landscape, far older and grander than anyone believed possible. In the jungles of Cambodia, Angkor's ruins stretch far beyond the temples tourists see. Each new discovery whispers the same unsettling message. Our ancestors were not primitive, and our history is not young. Some of these ruins defy scale and reason. Monolithic terraces in the Andes cut so precisely that even today, engineers cannot replicate them with ease. Under the waters off Yonaguni, Japan, massive stone steps rise like a staircase for gods, eroded but symmetrical. In the Gulf of Kumbat, sonar has mapped geometric patterns that suggest roads and foundations now buried beneath the waves. Scientists debate, argue, and often dismiss, but they keep returning, drawn by evidence that refuses to vanish. The world's surface is an unfinished excavation site, and the past keeps rising through its cracks. Archaeologists with 3D scanning tools and ground-penetrating radar find more anomalies than answers. Bones that appear too large for modern humans, ancient footprints pressed into volcanic rock measuring twice the length of a man's, artifacts whose metallurgy or precision suggests knowledge far beyond their supposed time. In Sardinia, megalithic tombs shaped like ribs of stone curve across the hills. Locals call them Tombe dei Giganti, the tombs of giants. In the Caucasus, dolmens built from slabs weighing dozens of tons form corridors aligned to solstices. The stones speak a language of geometry and gravity, and though we can measure it, we cannot translate its meaning. Science hesitates to call these things evidence. It prefers words like anomaly, outlier, misinterpretation. Yet the pattern persists. Across continents and cultures, the fingerprints of a greater scale remain. Monuments too large, tools too heavy, myths too consistent. Technology, the same force that once stripped the sacred from the mysterious, now restores mystery to the world. Every new scan, every new layer peeled back, shows that the past is not what we thought, it is more. In recent years, even genetics has joined the chorus. As sequencing grows more precise, fragments of unknown DNA appear again, scattered in populations from Oceania to Siberia. These are not Neanderthal, not Denisovan, something else entirely. The scientists call them ghost lineages. The ancients might have called them giants. What if these fragments are all that remains of a species larger than any we've yet found? Humans who left no way. Bones, only their breath within ours. The narrator's voice grows thoughtful, almost reverent. Perhaps the truth was never hidden. It was simply buried beneath our arrogance. We looked at the monuments and called them tombs. We looked at the myths and called them lies. We looked at the evidence and called it error. But the earth remembers in its own way, patient and precise. As dawn breaks over a landscape of stone, the camera glides above ruins half swallowed by jungle. Light pours through the trees, tracing lines that match the constellations above. The music swells, a quiet sense of revelation, not triumph. The voice returns, steady and calm. The truth is not buried under mountains or sealed in vaults. It stands before us, written in rock, water, and blood. We have only to look without fear. The scene fades to black. In the silence that follows, the echo of chisel on stone returns, ancient and familiar, like the heartbeat of the earth remembering its makers. As long as the idea of giants has existed, there have been those who claimed to have seen them. From the chronicles of ancient sailors to the journals of explorers, the testimonies scatter across centuries like faint constellations, too distant to verify, too consistent to ignore. Each report stands alone, but together they form a pattern, the enduring human conviction that somewhere, in the unexplored edges of the world, the old ones still walk. The first wave of such accounts came during the Age of Discovery, when European sailors crossed into unknown seas. Antonio Pigafetta, chronicler of Magellan's voyage, wrote of meeting men so tall that our heads reached only to their waists on the shores of Patagonia. The Spaniards called them Patagones, and later visitors swore they found bones to prove it. The giants became map legends, figures drawn on parchment beside dragons and storms, warnings of the strange scale of the New World. In the 16th century, Sir Francis Drake and his crew echoed the tale. In their diaries, they described footprints twice the size of a man's and huts built for bodies that could not be ordinary. Across the Pacific, Dutch and Portuguese captains told similar stories of colossal islanders, peaceful but towering. The details changed, the pattern did not. Whether exaggeration, mistranslation, or memory, these encounters entered Western imagination as proof that the myths had migrated from scripture to geography. As centuries passed, explorers turned inland. In Africa's Rift Valley, early anthropologists heard local legends of the first men, a race of giants who lived before the lakes filled. In the American West, miners found massive sandals pressed into ancient strata, and ranchers spoke of caves where giant skeletons sat upright, adorned with red hair that turned to dust at a touch. In 1911, at Lovelock Cave in Nevada, excavators unearthed oversized bones, stone tools, and sandals long enough for a man twice normal height. The findings were boxed and sent to museums. Only fragments remain today. The Paiute tribe, whose stories spoke of cannibal giants called the cited, had warned that the cave was cursed. During the colonial period, missionaries collecting myths encountered similar echoes. In the Philippines, elders pointed to enormous stone mortars and pestles said to have belonged to giants who lived before the flood. In Micronesia, builders of Nanmadol, an island city built from basalt columns weighing tens of tons, claimed their ancestors floated the stones with magic taught by towering visitors. In the Middle East, travelers told of Bedouins uncovering femurs longer than their arms. Each culture folded the mystery into its own memory, but all agreed on one truth: the world once held larger men. By the 19th and early 20th centuries, the fascination turned to obsession. Newspapers competed to publish every rumor of giant skeletons discovered. Photographs, some genuine, most crude forgeries, filled tabloids. The New York Times, the Los Angeles Herald, the St. Louis Globe-Democrat, all printed headlines describing unearthed remains of prehistoric giants. Public excitement burned bright, then died under the weight of hoaxes. But even after the sensationalism faded, serious explorers continued to search. British archaeologist Ralph Glidden claimed to have excavated enormous skeletons on California's Catalina Island in the 1920s. The Smithsonian dispatched teams to verify the reports. They found nothing, or said they did not. In the 20th century, military expeditions, mountaineers, and missionaries carried the legend into the modern age. During World War II, Allied pilots flying over the Solomon Islands reported seeing immense human-like figures in the jungle below. Locals told them of mountain people who avoided contact, sometimes stealing livestock. In the Himalayas, Western climbers chasing the legend of the Yeti collected hair and prints, some of which scientists later identified as bear, others as unclassified primate. Even today, Highland villagers speak of the old men, giants who watch from the snow, coming down only when storms hide the moon. Science shrugs, offering explanations, exaggerations, misperception, the lure of myth. Yet the persistence of these encounters across centuries raises a quieter question. What is it that humans are really seeing? Giant apes? Lost tribes? Or the reflection of something older, projected by memory into every horizon we do not yet understand? The narrator's voice softens, hovering between wonder and doubt. Perhaps there were no giants at all, only the human hunger for them, an instinct buried so deep that we conjure them wherever wilderness remains. Or perhaps, somewhere beyond the edge of our maps, remnants of a world before ours still wait, watching, unseen. The camera sweeps across jungles, deserts, and mountain ridges, places untouched by modern light. In the wind, the faint echo of a drumbeat, like a heartbeat older than language. The voice returns. Exploration never truly ends. We do not seek giants because we expect to find them. We seek them because, without their shadow, the world feels too small. Why do we still see them, dream of them, search for them? The giants no longer walk the earth, yet they inhabit something far more enduring, the human imagination. They are carved not in bone or stone now, but in story. In every age of disbelief they return, reborn as symbols of what we have lost and what we still fear to become. Psychologists call this the archetype of the giant, the embodiment of power beyond reason, the image of humanity's shadow self. To children, giants are monsters. To elders, they are ancestors. Across time they shift shape as easily as clouds, gods in one century, tyrants in another, forgotten teachers in the next. They are everything we revere and everything we regret, fused into a single colossal form. Perhaps that is why the myth refuses to die. It serves a purpose deeper than curiosity. It binds us to the scale of existence itself. The giant reminds us that there is always something larger than we are, mountain, ocean, God, or time. In a world we have measured and mapped, where satellites peer into every corner, the idea of giants restores mystery. They are the embodiment of magnitude, the living measure of our smallness. Without them, the universe shrinks to fit our arrogance. Anthropologists trace this hunger to our earliest stories. When humans first painted caves, they filled them with forms bigger than life. Those shapes were not errors of proportion. They were confessions of awe. The artists knew their place beneath the sky. They painted what they feared and worshipped in equal measure. To imagine giants was to remember humility. But myths are also memory. They preserve what the bones cannot. Somewhere inside the tale of Titans and Nephilim may lie the residue of truth, the distant recollection of a world shared with beings who looked like us but stood apart, both kin and rival. Generation after generation, that memory eroded into symbol until the giants became moral lessons. Yet behind every parable of hubris punished and strength undone lies a deeper whisper. We were not alone. Even in our modern age, their image evolves but never fades. We see it in cinema, in heroes that tower above destruction, in machines shaped like men, in skyscrapers that reach for heaven as the Tower of Babel once did. We call them titans, transformers, gods of technology. But the pattern is ancient. We are still building giants. Only now, we forge them from steel and circuitry instead of flesh. They walk our screens instead of our valleys, but their meaning is the same. To test the boundaries of creation, to ask how large a human story can become before it collapses under its own weight. Perhaps that is the secret. The giants are not merely what came before. They are what we fear lies ahead. The myths warn that every age of greatness ends the same way, with flood, with fire, with forgetting. The giants rise, build, overreach, and fall. Then the smaller survivors tell the story, just as we are telling it now. In that sense, we are all descendants of giants, not of size, but of ambition. We inherit their longing to create, to reach beyond what the world allows. The narrator's voice lowers, quiet but insistent. To believe in giants is not foolishness. It is an act of remembrance. Every legend we keep alive keeps part of ourselves alive with it, the courage, the awe, the humility to look up. When we speak their names, we are really naming our own beginnings, acknowledging that our species was never alone, that we have always shared this fragile planet with forces greater than comprehension. The camera drifts over twilight horizons, mountains glowing like the backs of sleeping titans, the ocean breathing slowly against stone. The voice returns one last time. The giants we seek are not out there in the dark. They are within us, in our blood, in our memory, in the hunger that drives us to build and to dream. Every age finds its own giants, and every age forgets them, until the next begins the search again. The screen fades to black. A heartbeat echoes once, slow and deep, like the sound of the world remembering itself. Long after their bones have crumbled and their names have faded from stone, the giants still live, within thought, within symbol, within the quiet architecture of our own identity. They no longer stride across the earth. They stride across imagination. They are the shadows we cast when we stand before eternity, the mirror through which humanity measures its own size. Every civilization has painted its world in the image of giants. To the Greeks, they were the titans, toppled by younger gods, an eternal warning that power without wisdom devours itself. To the Hebrews, the Nephilim embodied sin born of pride, erased by flood to cleanse the world. To the Norse, the Jotnar were both chaos and creation, the frost and fire from which life itself was forged. The myths differ, but the meaning remains. The giant is not an enemy of man, but his reflection magnified, his strength without restraint, his ambition without boundary. When we tell stories of giants, we are telling stories of ourselves. The titan who lifts mountains mirrors the empire that believes itself eternal. The giant who falls beneath the hero's spear is every civilization that built too high, too fast, forgetting the fragility beneath its grandeur. We invent these beings to remind ourselves that scale is not greatness, that height and power do not equal meaning, and yet deep down, we envy them. In every legend where the giant falls, there lingers regret, an ache for the time when humanity was small enough to stand in the presence of something vast. In this sense, the myth of the giant is the myth of humanity itself, a creature forever torn between humility and hunger, We are born small, but dream immense. We build towers to the sky, probe the edges of the universe, create machines that think, weapons that burn stars. Each act is an echo of the ancient impulse to stand taller than nature, to step beyond the limits of our creation. The giant is that impulse given form, the part of us that refuses to kneel. But every act of creation contains its own destruction. The same fire that lit the first hearth forged the first sword. The same knowledge that cures also consumes. When myths warn that giants fall, they are not describing monsters, they are describing cycles. Power expands, overreaches, collapses, and begins again. Flood after flood, empire after empire, species after species. The story of the giants is the story of history repeating itself until it learns humility. Modern science, with all its precision, still plays the same game. It builds telescopes that peer to the edge of time, colliders that mimic the birth of the universe. Each discovery enlarges us and diminishes us in equal measure. The more we know, the more we realize how small we are. In that paradox lies the eternal metaphor. We are both the giants and the grass beneath their feet. The narrator's voice slows, almost whispering. To understand the giant is to understand scale, the distance between what we are and what we dream to be. Myth gives that distance a face. It lets us touch the enormity of existence without being crushed by it. The giant is not a warning alone, it is a compass. It points toward the horizon of human potential, and toward the humility that must balance it. As the camera moves over a landscape at dawn, mountains rising from mist, cities glowing beneath, the voice continues softly. Every stone we lift, every word we carve, every star we chase is an act of remembrance. We are still building monuments to our size, still whispering the same prayer. Let us not be forgotten. In the end, the giants are metaphors for memory itself, monuments carved into myth to remind us of what power can achieve and what it can destroy. They are not gone, because the impulse that made them remains. Every generation becomes the next generation's legend, and the cycle begins anew. The music swells, strings, distant choirs, the echo of wind through stone. The narrator concludes, calm and reverent. We have searched for the giants for thousands of years. Perhaps we never needed to find them. Perhaps they have always been here, inside every act of courage, every dream that outgrows its maker, every heart that dares to stand taller than fear. The screen fades to light, not darkness, the whisper of dawn. We are their legacy. We are their metaphor. There comes a moment at the end of every search when the path turns inward. We have dug through bones and ruins, chased shadows through myths, and measured stars in the hope of finding those who came before. Yet every clue we followed, every story, every stone, has led back to one place, ourselves. The giants were never waiting to be discovered in the mountains or beneath the sea. They have been waiting inside our own reflection. The human journey has always been a conversation between memory and imagination. We look backward to remember who we were, forward to dream who we might become. The myth of the giants bridges that distance. It asks us to see our ancestors not as primitive, but as immense, creatures of courage and endurance who carved meaning out of chaos. Whether they stood 7 feet or 7 spans of history tall no longer matters. What matters is the impulse they represent, to build, to reach, to defy the limits written into flesh. Perhaps that is why every civilization tells the same story. The names change: Titans, Nephilim, Jotnar, Quinametsin, but the pattern remains. Great beings rise, challenge the heavens, fall, and are remembered by those left standing. Their downfall becomes our warning, their greatness, our inheritance. The giants are the ancestors of ambition itself, the reminder that creation and destruction are siblings, that every step upward comes with a shadow. In our age, we have become the new giants. We have split the atom, touched the moon, mapped the human genome, and reached across the void for other worlds. We wield powers our ancestors would have called divine, and yet we still struggle with the same questions they carved into stone. Who are we? How far can we go before the flood returns? The myth, retold for 1,000 generations, waits to answer. The higher you climb, the greater your duty to the ground beneath you. The narrator's voice softens, measured and intimate. Giants are not creatures of size. They are moments of scale, flashes of magnitude in the long dream of evolution. They are the architects of awe. To see them clearly is to see the best and worst of ourselves magnified. Their story ends only when we stop building, stop imagining, stop daring to stand taller than fear. As the final scenes unfold, the camera drifts across the ruins of the world. Baalbek's stones under rain, Machu Picchu rising through mist, Göbekli Tepe's pillars glowing in dawn light. The voice continues. Every stone we lift is a promise that memory will not drown. Every monument, every story, is another heartbeat of the ancient world living through us. We are the giants now, smaller in body, perhaps, but vaster in mind, carrying within us the sum of everything that walked before. The music swells into a slow crescendo, deep strings, a breath of chorus, the sound of wind over endless plains. The voice returns one final time, low and reverent. The mystery of the giants was never about height or power or the bones that time has hidden. It was always about us, the fragile creatures who learned to dream of magnitude. We searched the earth for their footprints and found them in our own. The screen fades to gold. A single line appears. They were here once. Now they are everywhere we dare to stand.
Tall, then silence.